Regardless of what the national rankings might say, I have some great English teachers back in South Carolina. They've always taught me that overusing a word is bad form. Despite that, throughout my speech you're going to hear me repeat the word unity. I checked every thesaurus I could find, and I'll tell you what, I couldn't find a proper synonym for unity. The Oxford definition of unity is the state of forming a complete and pleasing whole. Now, that's all well and good on paper, but I prefer anecdotal definitions. I prefer to see a word in action. What better place to witness a display of unity than at an event arranged by the NRECA, an organization founded upon that very principle? Originally, I was going to use this speech to talk about the great learning opportunity that the Youth Tour provided. I would have discussed what I had learned about cooperatives and United States history. But the more that I thought about it, and the closer the trip got, I realized the Youth Tour wasn't really about the monuments, or even the tours. It was about the people. What stuck out to me about the Youth Tour were the events that allowed me to interact with the others. Things like the boat cruise, the youth day, and the last night's dance. You see, these occasions were the most important to me because they showed me that a simple, "Hello, where are you from?" could turn into a much more profound interaction. And I think that's why the Youth Tour was such a great display of unity. It allowed complete strangers to realize they really weren't that strange after all. My week in Washington was one that I wouldn't trade for anything. However, we did have one low point in the trip. It came the night before we flew back to Charleston. You see, that night, a friend of mine came rushing into my hotel room with a grim look on his face. With sorrow in his eyes and pain in his voice, he told us that 9 people had just been shot and killed in Charleston. My roommates and I, we all recoiled. We were all upset and confused. But honestly, if you think about it, things like this have become commonplace, haven't they? The headlines are full of them. We have somehow become subtly immune to events like these. Horrible, tragedy, terror. We repeat these words, we mourn, and then we move on with nothing having changed. That night I asked myself what could possibly cause someone to do something so terrible. While on the flight back, President Obama gave me an answer. Racism, he said, was the reason that this young man murdered 9 people. He said this, and for a moment, I was back at the Lincoln Memorial, thinking about the disunity of our country during the Civil War. At the time, brothers, sisters, families, and friends were torn apart in complete disunity because of concepts as minor as the color of someone's skin. To see this issue rear its ugly head in my generation, a generation that is predominantly colorblind, well, frankly, it's appalling. If anything, it's disappointing. My generation, myself included, often views racism as an archaic concept, and yet it still continues to hinder and fracture our nation. But now that the cause, racism, has been discerned, we can look to how we could have prevented tragedies like this. We can look to unity. You see, it was unity that I felt when I walked into an airport filled with strangers, made a little less unfamiliar by the color of their shirts. It was unity I felt as I walked into a room with 1,700 people to introduce myself as the South Carolina YLC. It was unity that I felt when I stopped in the elevator to have a nice chat with someone from Wyoming, simply because I saw that they wore a name tag. Every kid on the Youth Tour was an individual. We each had our own stories, our own lives back home. But for 1 week, we were bound to 1,700 other people. And I think that if Dylan Roof had felt that kind of bond, had experienced that sort of unity, he may not have been driven to do what he did. You see, the great thing about the type of unity that I experienced on the Youth Tour is that we didn't find similarities in spite of our differences. We found similarity in the fact that we were all different. This type of unity is what the cooperatives are all about. Imagine if the ideals of the cooperatives were felt by everyone in the country. Imagine the progress and the advancements that this nation could realize if we were once again united. And I think that's exactly the kind of unity that our country needs. We all get caught up in the little things, and they distract us from the bigger picture. Distract us from the fact that we can find similarities in our differences. And that's what can make us all great. I want to leave you all with a question that I struggled with as I stood at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial. Why did Lincoln do great things? And I don't mean what allowed him to do great things. I mean, why did he do great things? Plain and simple. That question has churned in my head since I left the memorial. But since then, I've found my answer. I think that Lincoln did great things because he knew that great things needed to be done. Ladies and gentlemen, today we still have a whole lot of great things that need to be done. And we're the ones that have to do it. Judging by Lincoln's statue, we have some pretty big shoes to fill.